Hello, my name is Fernando Cross, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Chair of Sports Psychology in the Technische Universität Munich. And in this presentation, I would like to introduce to you the SPHERE guidelines for physical activity in mental health. This is a set of guidelines that we developed in a team of psychiatrists, researchers, and sports trainers in order to help the implementation of physical activity, exercise, or sport in the rehabilitation of people with mental health problems. SPHERE stands for Sport-Healing-Rehabilitation, and it is a partnership co-funded by the Erasmus Programme of the European Union, composed of different clubs and entities, including universities, coming from all parts of Europe. The project is led by the ECOS Europe, which stands for European Culture and Sport Organization. The main aim is to foster physical activity in psychiatric rehabilitation programs through the definition of a sports scientific protocol, which are the guidelines. The team consists of psychiatrists, researchers, and physical trainers. Here we can see a preview of the different institutions that participated in the program, but we will see them in greater detail as we go through the presentation. This presentation is divided into two parts. The first one is centered around the practical application of the guidelines, and this includes only a brief background as to how they were developed, which kind of process was followed. Then the practical application is centered around hypothetical examples that are based upon a survey that we did, and then we present the results of a pilot study that we did with these guidelines. The second part goes deeper into the theoretical framework, in which we present the physiological dimension of sport and exercise, followed by the psychological dimension and the social dimension. So let's begin with the part number one, practical application. How to best harness the physiological, psychological, and social benefits of physical activity for psychiatric rehabilitation. So we put together this set of guidelines based mainly on synthesis of evidence from scientific literature in the psychological, physiological, and social aspects of sports and exercise. We surveyed institutions that are already applying sports and exercise for psychiatric rehabilitation to learn about their practices. With this, we came up with the guidelines, and then we performed some pilot testing. And based on the feedback from the pilot testing, we made some fine-tuning of the guidelines. The final guidelines are meant to be adaptable to different circumstances present in different institutes. This includes, for example, institutional context. It could be, for example, a clinic or a social service, a charity, and these are different contexts in which sports can be applied. The local culture, what is the attitude of the people to sports practice or group practice, for example, surrounding environment, weather, the type of activity or kind of a sport that is at play, and the type of population, which includes, for example, the kind of diagnosis of the participants, if they have any, or are they mixed gender, what age, male, female. So all of these varying characteristics are contemplated in the guidelines, and they can be adjusted to these different contexts. But more precisely, where do the guidelines fit? So we need to consider the socio-medical procedures in mental health, which include psychopharmacology, psychiatric rehabilitation, and psychotherapy. So these are strategies that tackle mental health disorders, and usually the best kind of treatment includes all three of them in different degrees, or more precisely contemplates the three of them. But here, with the case of sport and exercise, we are focused on psychiatric rehabilitation. So that is to say that the use of sport and exercise in some cases may be sufficient for someone with mental health problems. However, that doesn't mean that it comes to substitute psychopharmacology or psychotherapy. So it is recommended to have an integral view where the place of each one of these strategies is considered. But in our case, psychiatric rehabilitation, more precisely, it is defined as a set of techniques and interventions that is useful for decreasing the effects of chronic mental illness or actively promoting the patient's reintegration in the social and work context of reference. This includes not only sports and physical activity, but also others like music therapy, horticulture, or any other kind of activity that is given a therapeutic focus, art, for example. But now that we are focused on sport, and as we have been mentioning before, there are physiological benefits, psychological and social benefits involved into the sportive practice that promote well-being. But then the question is, how do we make best use of these qualities? For example, in the physiological benefits, what kind of intensity, frequency of practice, the timing, the type of exercise to maximize these physiological modulations. In the psychological aspect, well, what kind of mindset or philosophy do we have? The meaning for the participants in this practice, how do we set the goals, how do we give feedback, for example. And in the social benefits, well, what group size is better, what kind of atmosphere do we promote, and what kind of attributes does the trainer need to have. Here is an overview of the phases of development that we went through to come up with the guidelines. At first, we had this evidence synthesis, which means we reviewed literature from different sources to come with the best practices in sports and exercise for mental health. Then we surveyed the different institutions and made special case studies of some institutions, developed the first set of guidelines. Then we reviewed the guidelines in the team. A pilot test was implemented. Then we received feedback and evaluation from the pilot test, and we saw also the results of the participants. And we fine-tuned the guidelines before signing them off. I would like to emphasize the three more important aspects. The first one of them, the evidence synthesis based on the literature. So we made a search of the most beneficial practices in sport and exercise for mental health. And this included physiological outputs produced by physical activity, psychological outputs, and social moderators that improve the other two. As an example of the kind of literature that we reviewed, there were previous guidelines, reviews on exercise interventions for psychiatric patients, and the subjective experience that the patients or the participants otherwise report, the psychophysiological effects of exercise in patients and healthy population, exercise recommendations for the population in general, group dynamics, goal setting, or the personal meaning in life, among others. Then the survey. We surveyed 108 institutions from the partner countries in Croatia, Finland, England, in Germany, and Italy. There were also in Belgium and Spain and Portugal. And from this, we made a more specific case study from 22 institutions. And in these two survey and case study, the topics covered were the aim of the program, the length of the program, which continuation options do the participants have after the program is over, what kind of activity or sport is done, the intensity of the exercise, of the physical exercise, length and frequency of practice, group composition, institutional frame, environmental conditions, among others. So with these two, we have an idea of the scientific outputs that can be observed with the practice of sport and exercise regarding mental health. And we also learn about the actual practice outside of experimentation or scientific studies done with patients. With these two, we made the guidelines, and then we implemented a series of pilot interventions in 4 institutions with different contexts to test the adequacy of the guidelines. So remember that the guidelines are meant to be applied in different contexts, so of course it makes sense to test them in different contexts as well. The main aim that guided this effort is to support people with mental health problems to proactively enhance their life quality and develop an integrated sense of self through sports and physical activity. Secondary aims, to where appropriate, support participants in symptom reduction, coping, mood regulation, comorbidity prevention, socialization, enjoyment, sense of purpose, physical and social confidence, and of course, provide a positive activity to take part in. Coming to the pilot interventions, I would first like to present the Everton in the Community program organized by the Everton Football Club in Liverpool, UK. For this pilot intervention, they had 20 participants with diverse conditions, and they used the activity of football together with coaching and psychoeducation to help them improve in their condition. This program lasted for 4 months. In Finland, the program Good Mind Sports, organized by the Finnish Sport Federation in the Tampere region in collaboration with the local clubhouse, where participants with diverse mental conditions as well, 20 participants overall, participated in a multi-sports group. That means they were exposed to the different sports and exercise options available for them. And this was to show them the importance of physical activity, help them cope with their condition, and of course, help them choose one activity that they would like to perform by themselves. And this program lasted for 3 months, but unfortunately, the lockdown measures due to the COVID-19 pandemic were imposed in the middle. So after the lockdown was over, the program continued for another 5 months. The program Horses and Butterflies in Italy was organized by the European Culture and Sport Organization, which is also the main organizer of this project. And in their case, they had 3 participants with eating disorders. They used the sport of equestrian vaulting for 3 months with the aim of enhancing the general well-being of young patients with eating disorders. And in Croatia, the program of athletic therapy organized by the Rijeka Sports Association for persons with disabilities, they had 15 participants in the autistic spectrum and with some of them with intellectual disability, and they use athletic disciplines with the aim of use them as a therapeutic tool to positively address mental health problems. The guidelines were fine-tuned after receiving feedback from the different pilot sites, and the final set is available at the Sphere website. The following guidelines are modular in nature, and that is to say that considering the different circumstances that one may apply these guidelines, one may adopt as many as the situation allows, as many as is possible. So let's see finally the actual guidelines. The end result is a set of 19 guidelines phrased as 19 bullet points. They are published in the Sphere website as a PDF document, and each one of them has a main bullet point and some precisions in case necessary. So when planning a new program or trying to improve an existing program, one can check if one is applying each one of the guidelines. And the more of the guidelines are adopted, the more efficiency we expect that this program will have. So I would like to go through each one of them and explain it briefly before going to some examples of implementation. Here, the number 1, the program encourages holistic clinical, psychological, and social improvement. That is to consider all the aspects of a participant or a patient. So if one institution, for example, is not a clinic, it could be convenient to have contacts with clinical psychologists or psychiatrists, for example, in order to refer the patients. The program is designed to develop and improve skills, facilitating cognitive stimulation through the learning process. And for example, here, improve concentration, coordination, memorization, use of equipment, and game strategy. So that this is to make the sport or exercise more stimulating, which has been proven in the literature to better enhance mental health. Number 3, activities are supervised by an instructor coach who should provide technical guidance, motivation, and support. So, of course, the coach or instructor should be knowledgeable of the activity in question, but also, as we will see in further guidelines, we want the sport to provide a transformative experience for the participants, so that in this, the process of goal setting, feedback, and sharing the experience is very important, and the coach plays a very important role. The program should involve setting of individualized goals for participants to support gradual improvement and development. So these goals can be especially about improving the skills in the activity, but also about attendance, participation, interaction with others, or team working. But the important thing is that these goals are framed in terms of an observable or measurable performance. And very important, they are not phrased in terms of clinical improvement. So, of course, we have the purpose of improving the clinical condition of the participants. However, this comes as a result of performing and improving and enjoying these activities. If we set that as the main goal, so one may become like overly self-conscious and obsessed with trying to improve in the clinical condition, which is not recommended. So this comes as a consequence of participating with other aims, with the aims in the sport itself. Then number 5, participants' learning, development, progression, and personal experience are reviewed through regular discussion and feedback. This is, of course, in order to facilitate this transformative experience, as we mentioned before, in the role of the coach. Number 6, the program promotes group activities with an optimal group size between 5 and 15 people per one instructor. This is based on the group dynamic literature, in which therapeutic sessions are better developed with this size of the group. The reason is that it brings differences of character and differences of experience, so that each participant can better learn from each other. It's also a manageable number, so that each participant can better get to know each other, and also for the instructor to remember and monitor each one of the participants in a better way. Also, in some cases where, for example, two participants may have a problem with each other or probably may not like each other, if the group is bigger, this is much easier to deal with. In the number 7, time should be designated for social interaction during and or after sessions, while instructors should facilitate both peer-to-peer support and a sense of enjoyment during the program. That is to make sure that this is an enriching experience, in case some participants may exclusively focus on the performance goals, for example. Here we want to make sure that they are actually benefiting socially from the experience as well. The program has a minimum duration of 3 weeks and optimally a duration of 8 weeks or longer, again based on the literature. But we know that from the survey that in many circumstances, for example, in some clinics, the patients stay for shorter time than that. So if 3 weeks or more are not possible, then a higher number of sessions per week is recommended. Still, sport and exercise is helpful in this short term to help to regulate mood, but of course, optimally to promote deeper psychological change and more stable, well, an optimal would be 8 weeks or longer. Sessions are designed to include between 30 minutes and up to 2 hours of activity. Again, based on the literature, that's the minimum to produce optimal physiological regulations so that the sport or exercise has, for example, an effect in neuroplasticity and in mood regulation. And 2 hours of activity, depending again on the kind of activity, is also to ensure that it's not exhaustive. Of course, there are some activities, as for example, going hiking, that take longer than that, but these are complex kinds of activities where there's many periods of activity and rest, and are overall structured different from a single practice session. But when talking about practice sessions or training, in between 30 minutes and 2 hours would be ideal. Number 10, sessions ideally take place at least 3 times per week. Frequent repetition is important to produce durable effects and also to improve performance. We are aware that in many situations this is not possible. For example, sometimes the practice is financed by the insurance company, and the insurance will only finance 1 session per week. But for example, if I am in this condition and I read this guideline that, okay, 3 times per week is optimal, then, okay, I am financed for 1 session, but I can recommend my participants to, for example, exercise by themselves twice or at least once another time in the week. And this can be structured in the way of a homework, for example. Activities take place optimally before midday. This is because it's seen in the literature that apparently the effects of exercising are stronger during morning time. But again, we are aware that this is not always possible for all institutions, or for example, if some participants go to school in the morning and then they attend the sports or exercise practice in the afternoon, this is absolutely impossible. But it's not a must. It's only as an enhancer. It's not a necessary condition. And that's why we also say we apply as many guidelines as possible. Number 12, sessions ideally finish at least 2 hours before participants normally go to sleep. We checked in the literature for safe spans to finish exercising so that sleep is not disrupted. And when summarizing all of this literature, we decided in the case of persons with mental health problems or patients in an institution, 2 hours is a safe span. Number 13, the program takes place in a safe and inclusive environment in which people feel physically, psychologically, and socially comfortable and a part of. And this is to ensure that perhaps through the different situations that can emerge, something as, for example, someone feeling too stressed to perform, or in the case there's problems between 2 members of the group, we ensure that the environment is friendly and inclusive so that it can help rehabilitation. The program should ideally seek to incorporate activities in the open air and natural environments. And the reason is that according to the literature, these are by themselves stimulating and enhance the positive effects physiologically and psychologically of sport and exercise. Again, we are aware that this is not always possible. And for example, if I find myself running a program that is inside a fitness studio, something that I can do to try to better incorporate this guideline is to organize 1 meeting at the park, perhaps 1 day, or 1 weekend of hiking. And this would include already this open air or natural environments. But again, if even that is not possible, then no problem. Just try to incorporate as many as the other guidelines as possible to improve the results. Number 15, the intensity of activities should preferably aim towards a moderate level. And again, we find in the literature that a moderate level is a safe way to produce effective psychophysiological modulations like mood improvement or neurotransmitter release or brain electrical activity modulation. without running greater risks that come, for example, with high intensity physical activity. And especially high intensity physical activity has shown to have some more powerful effects than moderate in the long and short term. However, that comes with greater risks. Very obviously, for example, injuries are more likely with high intensity exercise. But again, something like exhaustion as well can, in some situations, worsen depressive symptoms, for example. So that is not to say not to use high intensity exercise if that is the activity in one institution. However, it needs to be much more closely supervised. And in the case of low intensity activity, it can also help. But in this case, it needs to rely more in other kinds of stimulations that come with it. So either the activity is more complex, something, for example, like kicker or table tennis, or it involves more social or more social stimulation or more environmental stimulation. And in this way, according to the literature, it compensates for the lack of intensity and is still psychophysiologically modulating. Number 16, attendance to the program is voluntary, especially because within the philosophy of the guidelines where the participants' own effort in their improvement is important, their own voluntary participation, of course, is paramount on this. Number 17, the program attendance and involvement is flexible to accommodate for participants' individual current circumstance. So yes, they participate voluntarily, but in some occasions they may, for example, feel unwell or fall into an episode of depression and miss some sessions. That does not mean that because they missed the 2 sessions, we are going to kick them out of the program immediately, but we can take action in coming in contact to them and try to involve them again and ask if everything is right, for example. Number 18, prior to engaging in the program, participants are made aware of what is involved, consent is sought, and ideally participants are engaged in their choice of activity so that they know, for example, how long does the program last, if there's an option to continue afterwards, how big are the groups, and, for example, have some information on the psychophysiological effects of exercise and physical activity. This can be done either in information sessions or other options could be pamphlets for the participants. And finally, number 19, the program promotes continued engagement in physical activity beyond the program's duration. And well, the reason for this, of course, is that we all need to remain physically active, but especially in the case of mental health problems, they may take long times to recover, especially if a participant has been a patient for long before starting the sport and exercise program. They may have a lot to change in the way they are thinking and feeling, and may need to relay or count with the support of the practice of sport and exercise for a longer time. So if, for example, a program is lasting 1 month, then there may even be a choice to go to a non-clinical sports and physical activity, or to refer to other institutions that have available programs, or a regular fitness studio or regular sports club, for example. After reviewing the guidelines, let us apply them to 2 hypothetical cases. These cases, although hypothetical, they are based on common situations that we found in the survey and also on the feedback that we received after piloting the guidelines. So they should serve as good examples onto how to apply each one of the bullet points. In the first case, we have a dance course for outpatients, And this course takes place within a fitness studio with participants of diverse age, with different kinds of mental health conditions, but most commonly mild anxiety and depression. Occasionally, there are participants with more complex conditions, such as borderline personality disorder or people recovering from substance abuse, but these are the minority. And the gender is female. So let's start with number 1. The program encourages holistic clinical, psychological, and social improvement. To make sure we comply with that guideline, we make sure that we keep contact with mental health professionals, having the possibility to refer patients to them in case necessary. Number 2, the program is designed to develop and improve skills, facilitating cognitive stimulation through the learning process. And that is a given in the process of learning dance, because one has to learn dance steps, coordinate with the rest of the group, learn a choreography, and follow the rhythm. Number 3, activities are supervised by an instructor or coach who should provide technical guidance, motivation, and support. Of course, to teach dance, the instructor should be knowledgeable about dance, but let us not forget that the activity is therapeutic, so the instructor would also provide support, motivate participants in the learning process. For the fourth one, the program should involve setting individualized goals for participants to support gradual improvement and development. And in this case, we have long and short-term goals. The main goal when entering this course would be to have a showcase by the end of the course, but other short-term goals that are variable depending on each individual could be to improve the skills, the endurance, confidence levels, or making the custom for the final presentation. All of these are smaller goals and intermediate and short-term that still motivate action and keep engagement in the program. Number 5, participants' learning, development, and progression and personal experience are reviewed through regular discussion and feedback. To comply, there is in-session feedback about the performance, but also weekly and plenary sessions and private feedback where participants can express their experience and feelings voluntarily, of course, and this is part of the therapeutic process. Number 6, the program promotes group activities with an optimal group size between 5 and 15 people per instructor. So in this hypothetical case, let's assume the room allows for a maximum of 10 participants, and there are some subgroups that perform a special part of the choreography so that the interaction between them is stronger. So this guideline is complied. Okay, number 7, time should be designated for social interaction during and or after sessions, while instructors facilitate both peer-to-peer support and a sense of enjoyment during the program. So the program has a relaxed atmosphere, and they also allow time for interaction besides the class. Number 8, the program has a minimum duration of 3 weeks and optimally a duration of 8 weeks or longer. So let's assume the program lasts for 4 months, so that complies with this guideline. Number 9, sessions are designed to include between 30 minutes and up to 2 hours of activity. So if the sessions last 90 minutes, then this guideline is applied. And number 10, sessions ideally take place at least 3 times per week. So in this case, we have yellow because time only allows for 2 of them. However, to compensate, we recommend participants to practice 30 minutes at home one of the other days. And to help them do that, we can give them special exercises, which could be about one special step or elasticity or endurance, for example. 11, activities take place optimally before midday. In this case, we have red. It was not possible because the studio is only available after 5 p.m. But again, no problem. This is not mandatory. It's simply that we cannot include this guideline in this case. So it's okay. We follow the others. The number 12, sessions ideally finish at least 2 hours before participants normally go to sleep. And yeah, sessions are from 5 to 6:30 p.m. So that's in a pretty safe range. Number 13, the program takes place in a safe and inclusive environment in which people feel safe psychologically and physically. So yeah, the staff is friendly, the trainer is helpful, and difficulties between participants are always solved. 14, the program should ideally seek to incorporate activities in the open air and natural environments. Here we have again a yellow because it's not possible in the sessions because they are in a studio and we need the equipment in the studio. However, if we wanted to include this somehow, we could try to organize one day for hiking, for example, group unity. Number 15, the intensity of activities should preferably aim towards a moderate level. So the dance is active, but it's not exhausting. So it's, let's say, a good exercise that increases the heart rate, but participants will not be exhausted after the class. Number 16, attendance to the program is voluntary. Of course, participants come willingly to this class. They are well informed, so yes. Number 17, program attendance and involvement is flexible to accommodate for participants' individual current circumstance. So sometimes participants miss too many sessions if they feel unwell. This is accepted and participants may be contacted, for example, through a phone call. And here some precisions to make is that because we are organizing a choreography for an end showcase, here the instructors and organizers need to be flexible in case, for example, someone just definitely doesn't want to come anymore. They would need to adjust the choreography to function without that member, and also to be flexible for that person to catch up when they come back. So despite the performance aims, we should not forget that the main purpose of this workshop is therapeutic. And number 18, prior to engaging in the program, participants are made aware of what is involved, consent is sought, and the participants are engaged in their choice of activity. So the studio counts with information pamphlets explaining the program, what's involved. The first session consists of setting the framework where participants will be explained that there's a showcase in the end, that it's important that they are persistent with the program. But as mentioned before, if that's not the case, we need to be flexible. We encourage it, but we don't force it. And finally, 19, the program promotes continued engagement in physical activity beyond the program's duration. So after the initial 4-month course, there is a possibility to join the regular dance classes. So let's assume there are other dance classes that are not therapeutic in the same studio. So once the therapeutic program is over, the participants have the chance to move into the regular course. Now let's move into our next case, which is a general fitness course for patients inside a clinic. The course takes place in a gym and also open air areas are available. The age is again diverse. Mental health conditions are diverse, including mild and severe mental health conditions. And since this is a clinic, it can include conditions like psychotic disorders, severe depression, or substance abuse. And the gender is mixed. Number 1, the program encourages holistic clinical, psychological, and social improvement. Well, the clinic counts with psychotherapy and medical services. A physician must first approve for patients taking part in it. We are inside a clinic after all. The program is designed to develop and improve skills, facilitate cognitive stimulation through the learning process. Partner exercises are included to facilitate cognitive and social stimulation. So in this case, fitness, if we think about it, is more not as complex as dance, our previous example. But here, to make sure there is enough social and cognitive stimulation, the coach needs to be proactive and include exercises that need, for example, collaboration or coordination between partners. 3, activities are supervised by an instructor or coach who should provide technical guidance, motivation, and support. And of course, the course is held by a professional fitness trainer who also knows how to adapt exercises for safety and supervise the progress of the participants or patients. Number 4, the program should involve setting individualized goals for participants to support gradual improvement and development. So the initial fitness is assessed and goals are set accordingly to the circumstances and the time available for the patient in the clinic. Number 5, participants' learning and development progression and personal experience are reviewed through regular discussion and feedback. So in this case, there is feedback during training and plenary feedback after each one of the training sessions. Participants ask general questions and share their personal experience voluntarily. Number 6, the program promotes group activities with an optimal group size between 5 and 15 people. So here we have yellow because there's multiple sessions available at the clinic throughout the whole day. But for those sessions in the morning, there's usually fewer participants. So 3 participants. In these cases, the trainer needs to be more proactive to encourage participation and interest of the members. So we get a yellow in this case. Number 7, time should be designated for social interaction during and or after the sessions, while instructors should facilitate both peer-to-peer support and a sense of enjoyment during the program. And yes, the participants meet each other and the personnel around the clinic, so we comply with this guideline. And we go now to number 8. The program has a minimum duration of 3 weeks and optimally a duration of 8 weeks or longer. Again, we get a yellow because it is the case in clinics that some participants have shorter stays of 2 or even 1 week in the clinic. They are encouraged to make more weekly sessions in these cases. And yeah, this is to exemplify really the variety of circumstances that we can encounter and the adjustments to make for them. Number 9, sessions are designed to include between 30 minutes and up to 2 hours of activity. So yes, sessions last for 60 minutes. Number 10, they take place 3 times a week. And this is possible because there's many sessions available for patients so that they can accommodate their time for it. So we comply. Activities take place before midday, ideally. It is possible, but most patients prefer a later time because they may wake up later. So yeah, we get a yellow. Sessions ideally finish 2 hours before sleep time. So yeah, the latest session ends at 8 p.m. So that's a safe span. The program takes place in a safe and inclusive environment, taking care that everyone feels a part of it. And of course, yes, the trainer is respectful and friendly. 14, incorporating activities at the open air. So yes, the clinic counts with open fields and natural surroundings. So this is perfectly possible. And 15, the intensity of activity should be towards a moderate level. And the trainer carefully supervises progress to keep the participants at the participants' individual moderate level. Sometimes some participants are very energetic. The trainer carefully supervises their exertion level so that they do not injure themselves or are exhausted afterwards. 16, voluntary attendance to the program. So yeah, participants choose this activity among many offered in the clinic. Program attendance is flexible according to the condition of the participant. So yes, especially in the clinic environment, participants are encouraged, and if they are unwell or otherwise not fit, the staff reports to the trainer. If participants are informed, number 18, of course, the patients are informed by the staff about their choices for different activities, including these fitness sessions. And they also have counselors who can guide them in their decision. And 19, the program promotes continued engagement in physical activity beyond the program's duration. In this case, the patients who leave can continue in an outpatient program. The clinic also has contacts with regular fitness studios and sports facilities in the county to recommend to leaving patients. If the patients come from afar, the counselors work with them to find a suitable activity at their location. And well, these have been two examples as to how to adjust these guidelines for different circumstances. Now, let's move away from the hypothetical cases and see what happened in reality during our pilot testing of these guidelines. And just like in the examples, from our 4 sites, not all of them could implement all of the guidelines. They implemented most of the guidelines, but these 4 were not implemented in all 4 of the locations. So let's see what were the reasons. So the 5th one about supervising the progression and giving feedback to the participants was not applied in the case of Finland, because if we remember, in these activities, they were exploring different options for sport and exercise. So participants would not progress in this activity. Also, participants were already members of a clubhouse where they had this kind of feedback. So in this case, this rule or this guideline was not implemented. About the number 10, where sessions take place 3 times a week, this was not implemented in the case of the UK because the Everton in the community, they considered that 2-hour sessions twice per week were preferred for having enough time and sufficient quality contact to practice football. In Finland, the clubhouse could only accommodate for 90-minute sessions weekly. And in Italy, with the equestrian vaulting, there was unavailability of the installations, and so they were only able to apply it 1 time per week, 2-hour session. Then the number 11, activities take place optimally before midday. This was not possible for Everton in the community because participants need to travel to the venue and many of them prefer to wake up later in the morning. The daily schedule of the participants in Finland didn't allow for that. And in Italy, it was the same case. Their daily activities didn't allow for it. And the number 14, finally, the program should ideally seek to incorporate activities in the open air and in natural environments. It was not possible in Finland because most planned activities were indoors. And on top of that, there was also winter time in the meantime, which makes it difficult to do activities outside. But for the rest of the guidelines, they were successfully implemented. So what is next is to see what were the results for the patients when they participated in these programs. To have an assessment of the result of the programs for the participants, we use the short form 36, which is one form for assessing medical outcomes of different kinds of interventions. And it's available in a standardized version in each one of the participating countries. So the SF36 evaluates 8 health domains. And in our case, we take the percentage change in scores from the pre-assessment before beginning the program to the post-assessment after the last session at each one of the locations. So that's summarized in this table. Here we can see the different locations where the guidelines were tested. And over here are the 8 health domains. Here we see the percentage change from the before to the post measurement. And here under is the average of all the 4 sites of percentage change. As we can see in the individual test locations, most of the results were positive. So with either big improvement or more moderate or small improvements. And of course, unfortunately, there were some red spots, but in the aggregate, most results are positive, except for the 2 areas of physical functioning, which is drawn down by 1 decrease in Croatia, and in emotional well-being, which was more less consistent across the different test locations. But if we notice, these negative areas are only minus 3%, compared with the 23, 54, 27, etc. of the others. But to make a more concise summary, we can calculate a measure of effect size to rank these effects. So we calculated effect size with the results across these pilot sites. And for this effect size, the health domains with the greatest and also the most consistent effects rank higher. So both factors are taken into consideration. And important to say that these scores were calculated from the average scores at each one of the 4 locations. The individual scores for the participants will be prepared for future publications. So here is the table. And once we get into this ranking, we can see more clearly that the biggest and most consistent effect was in the domain of energy and fatigue, followed by a reduction in role limitations due to physical health, improvement in social functioning. Role limitations due to emotional problems is also reducing this kind of limitations. A very small limitation in pain. And here, general health, physical functioning, and emotional well-being in the aggregate are practically can be considered with no change. So to give an interpretation of these results, we can say that the pilot programs favored a state of increased energy and better social adaptation with less interference due to physical or emotional difficulties, favoring better adjustment in the process of overcoming mental health problems. That is, considering the aggregate results in all these locations, the most probably outcome for someone participating in these programs could be like described in this interpretation. On top of the medical outcomes in health domains, there's also a more specific psychological outcome assessment. And this is based on forms that were used at each one of the institutions according to their population and circumstance. These assess different aspects like emotional well-being, anxiety levels, or symptom reduction. So, for example, in the case of Everton in the community, they assessed emotional well-being with their participants, while with the horses and butterflies in Italy, since the participants were patients with eating disorders, they preferred to assess their anxiety levels and the reduction of their symptoms. This together can be considered as psychological outcome, and then put together with those aspects of the SF36 that reflect mental health, we can come to a closer idea of overall psychological outcome. And they were as well quantified as percentage change from the pre to the post assessment and average across all sites. So once taken into consideration, we can see again in England mostly positive results, except for 1 negative in emotional well-being in SF36. That's the same we saw before. But if we consider the average of all and consider them all as a psychological outcome, we can propose 66% in psychological improvement. So this is only a figure that gives us an idea that there was more improvement rather than a worsening, right? In Finland, where we count with the SF36 figures, putting the 4 together that more closely reflect mental health, we get 13% improvement. Now, for horses and butterflies in Italy, we see again a reduction in anxiety levels, in state anxiety and in trait anxiety, as well as an overall reduction in symptom severity, and again as improvement in the rest of the SF36 for an overall improvement of 32%. In Croatia, we see more variety of results in the different areas, and very consistent before with the SF36, we saw that the area of emotional role limitations and emotional well-being were negative. Now, when this is complemented with the quality of life index, the area of psychological health shows 0% change, and environmental health also 0% change, while others like physical health, social relationships, energy levels, and social functioning show improvement. So in overall, seems like there were more energetic and proactive, while still going through some emotional instability sometimes. But if we consider all the centers together, then the average psychological improvement across all pilot sites could be quantified as 31%. But again, this is just a number that assures us that things are actually getting better, but it's hard to tell exactly what a 31% improvement means when seeing how someone behaves. But it only suggests us that in the average for all the people who participated at all these places, it's more common to improve, and the improvement is big enough to make it into a positive suggestion. So an overall interpretation from the psychological outcomes is that these tools revealed that programs demonstrated an overall psychological health improvement in participants, reflected in processes like improved mental well-being, symptom reduction, and adaptability to the environment. But some participants may still experience moments of emotional distress. And as mentioned before, recovery from mental health problems is a long process, but what we can really see here is that participating in the sport and exercise is shaking things over. It's hard to tell specifically for each individual. That's something that only their doctors and their trainers can tell, but this is what we can tell from this aggregate, so we can really recommend these programs. But let's not only stay with the numbers. What about the testimonies that we received from the implementers of the programs and also from the participants? So from Everton in the Community, they tell us that one participant took up a volunteer position at Everton in the Community. One participant secured employment as a result of the pilot actions. And a number of participants went on to set up their own football teams. One testimony from a participant tells us, "I loved every minute of being part of Everton Football Therapy Program. It came just at the right time for me, as I had been struggling for a while. So it provided me with a really positive outlet to channel my energy and regain focus just when I needed it. I've loved meeting all the new people and now consider them all to be my friends." Everton also shares with us a routinary assessment they make, where we can see in parallel an improvement in running speed, that is shorter time to take the lap across the track, with an improvement in mental well-being, so that we can observe how these two aspects run in parallel. From Finland, they share that the pilot really helped and had a positive impact in the participants' self-esteem and personal resilience. And they also got better tools and knowledge on how to make healthy choices in their everyday life to improve their physical and mental well-being. Many of the participants also shared with the team that they found it important in their rehabilitation process and many of them found a new hobby based on these activities. The clubhouse that participated in the program will continue the cooperation with the Good Mind Sports, this program, and a group of the clubhouse members will be educated as peer instructors for low threshold sports. One participant shares, I'm worried about my physical condition because I'm usually too tired and distressed to go out of my apartment during the week. Because of Good Mind Sports, I had a reason and a companion to be active at least once a week. From Italy, horses and butterflies. The participants reached a good level of performance in equestrian vaulting. They performed a final event where they performed to the sound of music, and they could comply with exercises codified by the International Equestrian Federation. There was a moderate improvement in the relational area in general, while there was no decrease in body weight. And in one case, there was even a slight increase. And in a 4-month follow-up, 2 participants were still continuing the sporting path independently. From Rijeka in Croatia, they tell us, we concluded that sports activities, more precisely athletics, are very important and necessary for the development of people with disabilities, for their psychophysical development and socialization. After the implementation of athletic therapy, significant improvements were observed in terms of psychophysical development, including coordination, motor skills, and socialization. So in this first part, we saw some background about the guidelines themselves, and how to apply them into some hypothetical examples. Later on, we saw how they were actually applied in the pilot testing, where 4 different locations were able to apply them, mostly without a problem. They were able to adapt most of the guidelines set, and the results for the participants are also positive according to the testing that we made. So now let's begin with part 2, which is the theoretical framework in greater detail, how these guidelines were made from the literature especially, but also I have to remark that a full account of this theoretical framework is available at the Sphere website. So the main philosophy behind the guidelines is a person-centered approach, where the participant plays a very important and proactive role in their own recovery, so that they are an active participant in the process. In this sense, physical activity can serve as a conduit for people with mental health problems to enrich their personal experience, develop new perceptions of the self, provide purposeful and enjoyable experiences, and elaborate new meanings in personal life. So we are trying here to provide a transformative experience through the practice of sport, exercise, or physical activity. And to do this, we consider the effects that physical activity produces at different levels. We start from a more basic physiological level, which in turn, once it's modulated, it sets the place for further psychological effects. And all of this is helped through a helpful social environment. Now we know that these 3 aspects go hand in hand, but for the logic of these guidelines, our starting place is in the physiological effects, because especially there are many situations where the patients cannot stay for very long, like for example mentioned already in the clinics. So in this circumstance where there is not enough time for sport to generate a deeper psychological effect, we can still rely on these physiological effects, as we will see. So the physiological dimension, it's one that produces effects that are immediate and for the most involuntary. And as mentioned before, these physiological modulations will affect also the psychological state short term, and in a longer practice also long term, of course. This makes it helpful from early treatment to participate in exercise and facilitates conditions for further psychological development. So examples of this is that through the practice of sport and exercise, there is what we call the hypofrontality theory of exercise, where the brain shifts energy to motor areas and reduces the energy supply to those areas related with cognitive processes. So this would be a physiological, automatic, and involuntary reaction from making physical activity. But as a consequence of this, it facilitates the stopping of rumination, and that is because the reduced prefrontal activity facilitates this reduction of ruminative processes, which are common in patients. So an example can be if we are obsessing about something or worried about what can happen, or even in some cases thinking about our own symptoms too much, then involving in some activity that requires all our attention, all our physical capacity, it cuts with this ruminative process, and this has a physiological basis. And once we finish with the physical activity, this effect lasts for longer than the process than the exercise itself. So there's different reports of physiological effects lasting for 4 hours, half an hour, or even up to the next day, depending on which aspect is assessed. But the point is that these physiological changes are reliable, even in immediate after effects, and they can be helpful since early treatment. Other acute physiological modulations, like the one we just saw, are the modulation of neurotransmitter expression, which in turn helps regulating mood, motivation, appetite, or the sleep cycle, for example. Release of neural and vascular growth factors, which in turn will facilitate new learning. And this includes skills, attitudes, and thoughts. Even in the longer term, it has been detected that it facilitates long-term neural plasticity and connectivity in the brain as well. So if we translate this, if we consider learning new thoughts, new attitudes, and new ways to handle emotion as learning, then we need to relay in this neural plasticity, which in turn is helped by the practice of sport and exercise. So it regulates electrocortical activity, which in turn then facilitates cognition, and reduces the HPA axis hyperactivity, which then, as a result, facilitates the cross-stressor adaptation. That is, exercising in itself is a kind of physiological stress, and as the body gets fitter, it also gets more tolerant to other kinds of stressors, therefore more tolerant to anxiety and easier to recover from stressful episodes. But what about how to enhance these effects? What kind of conditions do we need to set to improve or to facilitate these physiological modulations? So very importantly is that we need at least 30 minutes of active practice to ensure physiological modulations that are effective. This is found across the literature. There are a few exceptions, but the safest way to assure effective modulation is to make 30 minutes of exercise at least. And as we saw in the guidelines before, up to 2 hours is a safe span. Morning exercise enhances the effects, but it is not essential. This has been seen with different markers, physiological as well with cognition. For sleep safety, so we checked in 2 reviews, which are large polls of other studies, and here a poll of a large number of people, what they think about or what they suggest about finishing exercise so that it's not disruptive of sleep. So in this review, we see they recommend 1 hour before sleep is still safe. And in this poll, they found that evening exercise at any point at the 4 hours before sleep is safe. So in considering both, we decide to recommend 2 hours before sleep, also considering that we are dealing with a population that can be psychiatric patients and where we need to ensure sleep is not disrupted. About the intensity, checking across the literature really many reviews and previous guidelines, we find more often that it is recommended to do moderate intensity. This is because it's effective in producing physiological modulations, and it's still safe to do. But within moderate intensity, so my moderate is different from the moderate of someone else. So it is up to the trainers and coaches to assure that each participant is at their precise or their adequate moderate intensity. Low intensity is an alternative for those who are not able or not willing otherwise to participate in moderate intensity exercise. But to generate psychophysiological effects, it requires to be more stimulating. For this, it needs more cognitive challenge or more social stimulation or more environmental stimulation. And examples from this could be Tai Chi, which is low intensity. However, it has a big component in memorization and muscular control. And also if it's made in groups, so one can share with other participants, making it then more socially stimulating. And in this way, it also becomes therapeutically effective. Vigorous intensity is a special case because on the one side, it has been shown to produce greater effects. So greater physiological modulations, greater cognitive enhancement, and it's even been proposed that could possibly remediate cognitive deficits, but it needs more research. However, all of this comes with greater risk as well. So there's the risk of pain, injury, and also emotional consequences out of being, for example, exhausted the whole time. And if one was depressed beforehand, then the exhaustion and the depression can become difficult to distinguish. So there are some risks. Another point is that overexertion releases excess cortisol. Excess cortisol is something that cancels out the neural growth factors and the vascular growth factors. And as a result, it makes new learning more difficult. So all of this is to say that, of course, one can use vigorous intensity exercise, but it really requires close professional supervision. Now, we want to move from these physiological modulations that we mentioned and their immediate effects to more longer lasting psychological effects, new ideas, new ways to process emotion that are facilitated from this transformative experience. So for this, of course, we need a frequent repetition for the psychophysiological effects to build up and produce these changes. The long-term effects are, well, at the more physiological or psychophysiological level, greater tolerance to overall somatic sensations, such as those present during anxious episodes. So we saw this in the cross-stressor adaptation. Sport and exercise have been shown to have antidepressant effects, which are equal or greater than medication. And improved cognitive function, where moderate exercise more often is seen to improve executive function and vigorous exercise processing speed. So translated into other words, we could suggest that moderate exercise makes or help us be more efficient with our brains, while vigorous exercise apparently makes the brain more powerful. But again, this needs more research, and again, vigorous exercise has risks involved with it. So how frequent the practice? So again, when assessing from different reviews, guidelines, and polls of large numbers of people, we come with different recommendations. So either 2 to 4 sessions per week, 3 to 5, 2 to 4. So taking them all together, that's where we suggest 3 sessions per week, ideally. But again, we know that this is not possible in all situations. But again, if this was the case, even 1 session is helpful already. However, we can give some homework or recommend home practice to still have some benefits of exercise and improve the results. From physiological effects to psychological effects still, how long do we do the practice? So the optimal duration suggested in one of the reviews is 8 to 12 weeks. But of course, this is the optimal, and as mentioned before, continued practice even after that is much recommendable, especially to maintain the obtained effects. And the survey revealed that there is participation of over a year in many of the programs that allow it. We wouldn't stay with the recommendation of one single review. So to confirm this, we checked in various guidelines and reviews how many times a recommendation is mentioned, or the conditions from the papers cited in those reviews for how long the treatments were. So when averaging all of them, we come with an average of 8.88. So pretty much stays in the range of 8 to 12 weeks. Now, because we know that not always it's possible to have 8 weeks, so what could be the minimal duration to have some durable psychological, psychophysiological effect beyond the immediate effects? So for this, there was no direct recommendation in the literature, but we considered that neuroplasticity is the basis for clinical improvement, considering that this is the basis for new learning. So we checked multiple reviews searching for the minimal time required to observe exercise-induced neuroplasticity in the following conditions. So in the case of neurological rehabilitation or functional rehabilitation, for example, after a stroke or traumatic brain injury, when patients are made to do physical exercise, how long or what's the minimal time required to see some neurological or functional rehabilitation? The same for motor learning in healthy participants, as well as animal models. So in a similar process than before, here I'm only going to display you the average. It came out to be very close to 3 weeks as a minimum for producing neuroplasticity. But we stress that with the case of these 3 weeks, then it's important to have more frequent repetition, especially to adhere to the guideline of 3 weekly sessions. Now we move into the psychological dimension, which, as mentioned before, builds over the physiological dimension, but we do not want to stay in there. We want to have a deeper change in perspectives, especially if we want to prevent exercise addiction, where a participant or a patient gets used to rely on exercise to regulate the mood, but there is no deeper change. So this could be one risk, but to prevent that, we need to go beyond using exercise to regulate mood. So that means having a modification of maladaptive attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, or thought patterns. Physiological effects allow for a susceptible period where a patient can begin to experience daily life from a different perspective and develop new personal meanings, attitudes, and thought patterns. So that is to say that after, for example, having the first session and having still these effects relaying in the organism, there is a window where one can start to think differently, to learn new things. And that's why it's very important also to have feedback after each session or every time in a week, or to have psychotherapy at the same time. So sportive practice facilitates personal experiences of enjoyment, achievement, learning, and social interaction. But of course, I would also like to stress that in the process of overcoming mental health problems, not everything is feeling great the whole time. There's many challenges. Or if, for example, we had been suppressing a feeling and the sport practice makes this feeling to come out, at first it may not feel so great, but it's part of the process of changing. Again, stressing the person-centered approach, it is very important to promote these changes. And more than authority, the staff adopts the role of autonomy support. And the staff will assist participants towards greater levels of independence, while incorporating the perspective of these participants. And in this way, decisions are taken together, participants and staff, in contrast to an approach based on authority. And these decisions could be about training goals or about the involving the personal feelings, for example. In this process of change and overcoming mental health problems, personal meaning is an important factor. This is a quality where persons can create and maintain a sense of order, certainty, and value of the self for in the external world and in relation to themselves. Importantly, in the case of sports, is that this capacity for fluid compensation, which means that reaffirming meaning in one life domain can transfer into other domains. For example, sports achievement can enhance a damaged self-esteem after academic failure, or completing a task with clear outcomes can compensate for feelings of uncertainty. In this way, a participant can eventually build a sense of meaning that extends beyond the sporting practice and into fields like self-esteem, need for certainty, or affiliative needs. Nature exposure is another factor that facilitates meaning derivation. In this regard, exists the biophilia hypothesis, which states that the mere exposure to nature can trigger innate cognitive and emotional reactions that favor positive affect and facilitate meaning creation. So that's one of the reasons why this can be helpful in the case of low intensity exercise. The nature or the open air by themselves help in generating these modulations. But in this way, also nature exposure has been seen helpful in coping with personal loss, like, for example, missing a loved person or having otherwise lost something in life. Here, I would like to display these two papers where in this one is demonstrated how, related to this biophilia hypothesis, how nature experience reduces rumination. And this is also seen in terms of brain activity in imaging studies. And on the more psychological side, but also related to this, how meaning in nature can be a mediator of well-being. But now going into more the conditions for more effective psychological change, goal setting is very important because it provides an aim, fosters the motivation and the engagement, calls the willpower, and let's not forget that we are in a person-centered approach where the participants become more responsible for themselves eventually. So it also helps focus attention and place effort. So especially focus attention, again, with the rumination. If I am consumed by my own thoughts, I may learn to give them focus into something. The goals should be set by the participant together with the staff. And very important, it should be set in terms of performance in the activity, not in terms of clinical improvement. That's the goal of the program, but not the goal of each participant. So the goals here are meant to orient attention, to orient our efforts, and of course help us cope with our condition. However, if we set a goal, for example, of you should feel better in 1 week, then a week passes and I may be feeling more anxious, and then I will feel, well, it's not working, so I will quit. No, feeling less anxious is probably, or less anxious or overcoming mental health problems takes longer, and in the meantime I need to be focused in progressing otherwise in other aspects which are also motivating. The goal has to be specific and measurable, or otherwise clearly observable. And the goals can be set in small and incremental fashion that can be achieved by the participant, especially to keep a sense of motivation and self-efficacy of the participant. We need to be helpful to make sure that they achieve their goals, especially at the beginning. Some example of goals that can be set in the short and medium term, most importantly, goals should be frequently reviewed and updated, and some examples are increasing running speed or jumping height, but others, depending on the case, can be something as simple as showing up on time or collaborating more with others. It's not a performance goal per se, but it's still something objective that can be observed. Then on the long term, these are more milestones or achievements, which are not essential for all kinds of interventions. For example, it may be a fitness session where each participant is gradually improving and there is no specific milestone. But in other cases, for example, with the dance course, the goal can be an end-of-term showcase, for example. But other examples of long-term goals can be reaching a standard in a certain amount of time, such as running at certain speed or lifting certain weight, or, for example, participating or reaching some level at the season tournament. So these are other long-term goals. But both of them need to be reviewed and updated, and adjustments need to be made for achieving them. So now, in the process of precisely revising the goals is the feedback. It allows to monitor goal progression and make the necessary adjustments, provide information to the participant to focus attention on the specific aspects that need to be adjusted for performance, and this helps with the motivation. But here, with our therapeutic approach, also allows for self-expression, and most importantly, allows to integrate the training experience in the process of psychological change. So as we mentioned before, linking again psychological with physiological, first we have the physiological that produces these neural and vascular growth factors that will promote neuroplasticity for new learning. But then what kind of material do we bring? So we need to elaborate the experience after the training or after the practice, and this is where feedback comes very useful. Another issue is that feedback can facilitate the emergence of material for psychotherapy, which in such case one would need to refer to psychotherapy if the participant is not already in psychotherapy. So it could be, for example, someone with flat affect, depressed with flat affect, gets involved into sport practice, and usually this person does not show much emotion, but in participating here may encounter frustration in not achieving a goal, for example, and this will bring emotions out, which normally were not visible. So to the degree appropriate, they can be followed within the feedback and always referred back to the sportive practice. But let's not forget that this is in psychiatric rehabilitation, this is not psychotherapy. So if the material is too deep, too complex, sport is helping to bring it out, but still, in this case, needs to be referred to psychotherapy for further elaboration. So in this case, the coach needs to know where's the threshold for these cases. But for adjusting feedback, something important to know is that when training is more vigorous so that the participants are tired in the end, feedback is less effective. It's already seen that high-intensity exercise can impair subsequent learning. So if we wanted to promote psychological change, the feedback would not be effective in these conditions. So what to do? One may delay feedback until the participants are no longer exhausted. For example, after letting them stretch and relax so that they can catch their breath again. Or hold the feedback rounds before training starts, addressing the previous session, for example. So the implementation details depends on each case and each institution how it can work. But in any case, the guideline is there to implement feedback. Now, we've talked about the physiological effects and the psychological effects, but we mentioned before that these are helped with a social environment, appropriate social environment. So how do we promote that? So moving into the social dimension, the experiential and learning processes triggered by sportive practice are enhanced within a favorable social environment. So in the reports of participants, they often mention that socializing is a very important component in the treatment, and we also saw it in the feedback from our pilots, as we saw before. The trainer is a very central figure. Also from reports from the patients, it's actually the central figure to keep participants motivated. And they highly value competency of the trainer in physical and skill training, but also the personal trustworthiness and confidentiality are very important as well. And also from the reports in the feedback that we received from the pilots and the survey as well, it is mentioned frequently that the trainers become, or the patients or participants become very confident with the trainers, that he or she is a very trusted person. A group size in between 5 and 15 participants is considered to best enrich the intervention, since it provides diversity of characters and allows members to get to know each other. And it also facilitates the mutual sharing of experience in this way, while these numbers are enough to let the trainer to keep track of each one of the members. This is very important. Also, as mentioned before, in case there's participants who have a problem with each other or don't like each other, a bigger group makes this easier to deal with. And also the group size may be affected by the conditions present at each institution. So in some cases, there may be, for example, great number of participants coming for a single session and the trainers cannot pay attention to each one of them. So if it was possible, it would be great, for example, to have 2 trainers or 3 trainers to supervise a reduced number of the participants. So we see here actually the adjustments for the group size. If it's greater than 15 participants, one possibility is to add more trainers. make smaller groups, and then give the personal or group feedback to those smaller groups. If the group is less than 5 participants, it's seen in the literature that it may not provide all the benefits of the group dynamics. However, the trainer can compensate this by assuring cohesion between the group members and hold a closer interaction with each one of them. Now, how to introduce the program to participants? It's important to clarify to participants that the attainment of the benefits of sport and exercise is a gradual process in which they take a very active role, where persistence is key. And again, here's where goal setting and goal terms in terms of performance or observable behavior are important, because the actual clinical improvement is a gradual process that happens as a result. So specific information can be given to the participants through separate information sessions, for example, or through providing written materials. Now, talking about continuation options, they're important because, as mentioned before, the healing process may need to continue even after the patient is stable. And continual sportive practice can prevent clinical relapse. And even for any person, it's important to stay active and not just do sports in one kind of course, and then when the course is over, don't do it anymore. In the survey, we could see engagement from patients or participants for a year or more if it was possible. But if it's not possible within the program, well, one could either sign for a new cycle, or contact a separate institution, or enter a non-clinical program in the same institution, for example. Well, so it's been a long journey. We had first an overview of the guidelines, their application, and the pilot studies. Now we went into the background theoretically for the physiology, psychology, and social aspects. So all in all, we hope that this presentation is helpful when planning to apply the SPHERE guidelines. And we really hope that the power of physical activity can be used to help more people in their mental health across Europe and across the world. I would like to thank you very much for your attention and wish you all the best.